Welcome back. All right, so yesterday I finished the series looking at teams that missed the playoffs. Today we are starting to look at teams that made the playoffs but didn't get out of the first round. And I figured we should start with the Toronto Maple Leafs. This is where there's been a lot of discussion. Obviously, today they fired Sheldon Keefe. They're looking for a new coach. I think they need to figure out a new direction with this because if after 8 years it's not working, it's probably not going to work in year nine. And we'll go through this. And what I've got on the board here is I've highlighted the core four, the four guys that are being counted on. And I don't think this is something that works. And I've got a couple of examples on the board of other teams that are still playing hockey. And we'll take a look at that when we get there. But the cup drought for Toronto is now at 56 seasons, which is an all-time record. They haven't been in the Stanley Cup final in that time either. Believe that's an all-time record as well. Because you can't win the cup without going to the final, so it makes sense. The last time they were first in the National Hockey League was 1963. So this is not a team that's been number one in the NHL. And the last time they went to the conference final was 2002. So it has been a long time since we had any kind of a lengthy run by the Toronto Maple Leafs. So put it this way. Any Minnesota fans watching, the most recent or conference final they've been to, 2003, so more recent than Toronto. But for the Toronto Maple Leafs, it started pretty well in the Austin Matthews era. You win the draft lottery, you've got a team that tanked to be 30th overall in a 30-team league, and then they made the playoffs in 2017 when nobody expected it. So they did not have home ice in that first series. Against the Washington Capitals, they lose that series in six. They did lead that series 2-1. And that was under coach Mike Babcock. But in that series, Matthews, 4 goals, 1 assist, 5 points. And Nylander had a goal and 3 assists. Marner had a goal and 3 assists. Anderson a .915 save percentage. Again, the Caps had home ice advantage. Nobody was really expecting much from Toronto. They had 16 goals in the series. 6 of those came from the combination of Matthews, Nylander, and Marner. They scored 2.67 goals per game. So the idea was they're going to get better. In 2017-2018, they did in terms of their points total and everything, and they drew Boston in the first round. Boston, a veteran team, not an easy pick, and they lose in 7 games in that series. Marner had 2 goals and 7 assists for 9 points in that series. Matthews, a goal and an assist. Nylander, a goal and 3 assists. So Matthews struggled in that series. Anderson ended up with an .896 save percentage. McElhinney an .826 when he was in there. They trailed this series 3-1, though. They won games 5 and 6 to force a game 7, and then it didn't work out in game 7. So if that sounds familiar, we'll get there. They had 4 goals out of the 20 from those core guys of Marner, Nylander, and Matthews. So they were getting goals from everywhere else, just not from them. 2.86 goals scored per game in that series. Pretty good comparatively speaking to some of the other numbers on the board. And again, the Bruins had home ice advantage in Game 7, which is huge. Boston with home ice in Game 7, huge. 2019, Game 7 again, Boston again. So the Boston Bruins kind of getting in the heads of the Toronto Maple Leafs here. Matthews ends up with 5 goals and an assist in that 7-game series. Tavares joins the group, 2 goals, 3 assists for him. Marner, 2 goals, 2 assists, and Nylander, a goal and 2 assists. Freddie Anderson, a .922 save percentage. And that's right around where I remember I started really needing to defend Freddie Anderson when there was a lot of, hey, he's not the goaltender. It's not the goaltender that's the problem. I thought Anderson was fine. And they led that series 2-1 and 3-2. It looked like they might get over the top, and they just didn't. 10 of their 17 goals in that series came from the core 4. They only scored 2.43 goals per game. So this is one of those series where you could say they got 10 goals in that series from the core 4. They needed more help from elsewhere. The Bruins had home ice advantage again. So of the 3 series in those first 3 years, Toronto did not have home ice advantage in any of those series. I do think at times Toronto gets overestimated and overranked because of the fact they're playing out of Toronto. Now, people will say, well, they're in a really good division and, being third and on the road and all that. True, there's some validity to that. However, other teams figure out a way to get over the hump and get out of tough divisions and win Stanley Cups, and Toronto just hasn't been able to do that. And then in 2020, we had a qualifying round because bubble playoffs. The bubble was in Toronto. And I remember when that happened, people were like, this is set up so Toronto and Edmonton win the Stanley Cup. And this is what a stinker this is. And then neither Toronto or Edmonton got out of the qualifying round. It was weird. Matthews had 2 goals and 4 assists in that 5-game series that was won 3-2 by Columbus. Nylander, 2 goals, 2 assists. Marner, 4 assists. Tavares, 2 goals and an assist. They only had 10 goals in that series. 6 of those goals came from the core 4, so they only scored 2 goals per game. The coach at this point is Sheldon Keefe. So Babcock was the coach for those 3 exits. He gets fired as early in the 2019-2020 season. Sheldon Keefe takes over. And again, this is a situation where they're at home. Freddie Anderson puts up a .936 save percentage. And again, what were people saying to me? See, Freddie Anderson's not a big game goaltender. He can't get it done in the playoffs. He's the problem. Yeah, Freddie Anderson's had some playoff success since he left Toronto. 2021, they had the series lead. They had it. Montreal was down 3-1, and then they roared back and won 3 in a row. And I think the overtime win by Montreal is where I realized, oh my gosh, it's going to happen again. So Nylander had 5 goals and 3 assists in that series. Matthews had a goal and 4 assists. He struggled. Marner just the 4 assists. Tavares just played the 1 game. Did not have a point in that 1 game. Campbell, .934 save percentage as Jack Campbell takes over in the net. Again, this was the first year under Sheldon Keefe. 7 of the 18 goals in that series. Actually, 6 of the 18 goals in that series, because I've got Tavares with 1-0-0. It should be 1-0-0-0. So, 6 of the 18 goals. I'll go ahead and change it. Fine, I'll change it. Because there were 5 from Nylander, 1 from Matthews, and nothing from either Marner or Tavares, because Tavares got hurt in the first game of that series. They only scored 2.57 goals per game. So again, they're kept around that 2.5 range for the second out of 3 series, and they were only in the 2 range against Columbus. That's problematic. Again, Jack Campbell's numbers were good, but there's only so much he can do. They led the series 3-1, and they blew it. And they had home ice advantage. So if you want to get into when the Leafs have really truly choked, to me 2021's the year that really stands out. That's the year they should have got out of the first round and didn't, and then Montreal goes all the way to the Stanley Cup final that year. 2022, again, they lose 4-3 in the first round. They set a record amongst all professional sports in North America in terms of losing a win or go home game. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years in a row they did it, and this time it's Tampa Bay. Now, Tampa was on their way to a Stanley Cup final as well. They didn't win in 2022, but they were coming off back-to-back Stanley Cups. And they defensively struggled a bit against Toronto in this series. Toronto did lead the series 3-2 and then found a way to lose it. Matthews, 4 goals, 5 assists, 9 points. Marner, 2 goals, 6 assists, 8 points. Nylander, 3 goals, 4 assists for 7 points. And Tavares, 3 goals, 3 assists for 6 points. Jack Campbell, an .897 save percentage. That would be his final playoff appearance as a goaltender for the Maple Leafs. 12 of the 24 goals in that series came from the core 4. They scored 3.43 goals per game. They scored pretty well against Tampa Bay in the playoffs. The Leafs had home ice advantage in that series as well. So they lose Game 7 at home. That's the advantage of home ice, I guess. Then 2023, they did it. They get out of the first round. How? They avoided Game 7. The dreaded Game 7's avoided. They won it in 6. So in that series, Marner, 2 goals, 9 assists, 11 points. Really strong series for him. Same with Matthews, 5 goals, 4 assists, 9 points. Tavares, 4 goals, 3 assists, 7 points. And Nylander, 2 goals, 5 assists, 7 points. 13 of their 23 goals in that series came from the core 4. They scored 3.83 goals per game. Easily the best series they've had in the Matthews era. In terms of scoring. And again, they had home ice advantage in that series. They trailed that series 1-0, and they won 4 of the next 5. Really strong series. However, they wanted Florida. Fans were chanting, "We want Florida." They got Florida. And as a Boston fan at the time, I remember thinking, you don't want Florida. And they didn't. Florida won that series in 5. It's the only time that Toronto loses in 5 games, other than the 3-2 series here. Losing a best of 7 and 5. It's the only time that had happened for them. Nylander, 2 goals and an assist. Marner, a goal and 2 assists. Matthews, 2 assists. Tavares, 1 assist. Woll ends up with a .921 save percentage. Samsonov, .892. They trailed 3-0 in that series. They won Game 4 to force a Game 5. That's as close as it got. The Leafs had home ice advantage, so they lost Games 1, 2, and 5 on home ice. Really, really tough go for them, especially since They had just beaten Tampa Bay, and it looked like, this might be the year. And no. 3 of the 10 goals they had in that series came from the core 4. That's 2.00 goals per game. That's as bad as it gets, right? No. 2024, this year. They lose against Boston in 7 in the first round. Again, that's the third time. Again, they trailed 3-1 in the series, just like 2018. So 6 years later, it's the same story. Matthews, a goal and 3 assists for 4 points. Nylander only played 4 games, had 3 goals. Marner, a goal and 2 assists. Tavares, a goal and an assist. Samsonov, 896 save percentage. Woll, 964 save percentage. Missed the final game of that series. It's not the reason that Toronto loses that series, though. The reason they lose the series is they had 6 of their 12 goals from the core 4. Actually, by my count, I counted that wrong. Let me just go ahead and change it. So we'll change that number to 7 of the 12 goals. So I had 1 less than I should have here and 1 more than I should have here. It balances. So 7 of the 12 goals in that series came from the core 4. But they only scored 1.71 goals per game in that series against Boston. They couldn't solve Swayman. And Boston, again, has home ice. Home ice, home ice, home ice. That is 3 times they've had to go to Boston looking for a win in a Game 7, and all 3 times Boston's turned them aside. So we're going to go over here, and then we'll come down to the salary cap, because that's what everybody talks about. And there's validity to what everybody talks about. So Marner in this year has played 57 games, 11 goals, 39 assists, 50 points. That's a rate of 72 points if it's an 82-game schedule. That's not good enough. For Marner, he's been, routinely around the 100-point mark in the regular season. He has not been able to make that work in the playoffs. Matthews, 55 games, 23 goals, 25 assists, 48 points. He's scoring at a 34-goal rate over an 82-game schedule. So again, Matthews has been controlled in the playoffs. He's had some good series, but in general, it's been disappointing. Nylander, 54 games, 20 goals, 23 assists, 43 points. Nylander's had some rough playoffs. This series, he played well, but he's definitely had some rough playoffs. Morgan Rielly, 57 games, 11 goals, 29 assists, 40 points. I think Riley's been a really good defenseman for them, but is he that Adam Fox level defenseman? No. Is he that Cale Makar level defenseman? No, and we will come back to that. Tavares, 38 games, 12 goals, 12 assists, 24 points. And Tavares is the one that I think people are going to want to trade out of that core 4. I don't know that there's a taker for that contract, even though there's only 1 year left. And then this is where it gets interesting. So you've got your top 5 scorers during this era. The next one is Kerfoot, 30 games, 4 goals, 9 assists, 13 points. And then Zach Hyman, who right now is really experiencing a lot of success in Edmonton, 32 games, 5 goals, 8 assists, 13 points. It is ironic that the forward that leaves this team for more money elsewhere, that Leaf fans are like, hey, he's never going to justify that contract, ends up looking like kind of a steal in Edmonton on his cap hit. And while that contract may not age well towards the end of it, who cares if he's producing really well and helping a team in the playoffs early on in that contract? So it is odd that the one player they let go that wasn't producing for them in the playoffs goes on and produces elsewhere in the playoffs, telling you that either it was a bad mix with Toronto or he wasn't being deployed correctly in Toronto. So that's where the question comes in. Now, their pending UFA list is lengthy. Bertuzzi and Domi. I think they're going to find a way to keep Domi around. I don't think Bertuzzi sticks around. I'd be kind of surprised if he did. Brody, we'll see. Edmondson, Giordano, Lyubushkin. Samsonov and Jones are both UFAs this summer. I don't think they keep either of those goaltenders. I think you go with Woll and then you look for an improvement somewhere else. Muzzin, Murray, and Klingberg. So all 3 of the LTIR contracts expire this summer. Klingberg was brought in to help the defense and to help get over this scoring hump that they had a problem with in the playoffs. And again, their scoring dropped in these playoffs. If Klingberg had been in the lineup, I think they still lose to Boston, but there's just one of those ifs right there. And then you've got the pending RFAs. You've got Dewar, who I think has been solid since arriving from Minnesota. Robertson, I like Robertson a lot. Gregor and Liljegren. Liljegren, I think you probably give him a bridge deal, and we'll see what happens with him. So, yeah, sorry, I just had to pet a cat. But their cap space July the 1st isn't what you'd want it to be if you're Toronto. $18,530,333. And I say it isn't what you'd want it to be because there's a lot of players here they need to replace. A lot. So then the question becomes, well, so do they trade somebody out of the core 4? I think the biggest flaw with Toronto over this 8-year run has been they don't change course. They generally don't. Like they bring in other supporting players and they shift the chairs around a bit on the deck, but they don't really change the team. It's the same. It's the puck control and okay, well we play this kind of game and this is our game. And it's not about toughness. I don't think toughness is a problem with this team. It's about the fact that it's just it's not working. So we'll look at the salary cap hits. Matthews cap hits $13.25 million until 2028. Tavares $11 million for one more year. Marner $10.9 million for one more year. And Nylander $11.5 million till 2032. Now there's the chance that over this next couple of summers we'll start seeing other teams with multiple players above $10 million in their cap hits, and maybe Toronto becomes more in line with what the rest of the league is. But when you look at the Colorado Avalanche and the New York Rangers right now, and those are the two I picked, I think I could have picked any of the teams still in the playoffs and found something similar. You look at the Avs, McKinnon, $12.6 million cap hit. Rantanen, $9.25 million cap hit. Nichushkin, $6.125 million cap hit. Makar, $9 million cap hit. Cale Makar's cap hit is lower than all of the four. Then you got Georgiev, their goaltender, $3.4 million cap hit. Go over to the New York Rangers. Panarin, $11.6 million cap hit. And there's been times where people have talked about Panarin, that's a lot of money, but he's produced really, really well. Zibanejad, $8.5 million cap hit. Kreider, $6.5 million cap hit. Adam Fox, one of the best defensemen in the league, $9.5 million cap hit. Shesterkin, $5.67 million cap hit for arguably the best clutch goaltender in the National Hockey League right now. The Toronto Maple Leafs are just built wrong. And we know that Kyle Dubas gave these guys more money than he probably should have. One argument that I made with Kyle Dubas during his time in Toronto was it did feel like he was personally close to the players and kind of friends with the players, and I felt like there needs to be that separation between general manager and player. I felt like sometimes the cap hits were higher than they should have been because, yeah, sure. And the idea that, well, we can't break this up. They have to change the philosophy. They have to break this up. You either get into a cap situation where you've got guys making good money, but not necessarily, breaking the bank. And right now you've got four guys that are. Tavares is contracted $11 million. You can't trade it at that. Not without adding a lot of sweeteners. And you're still going to have to retain. And with the fact that Tavares' numbers were down this year offensively, that's why I say Marner's the one that they likely would look to trade. His contract's up next year. A team acquiring him could sign him to a contract. And I'm just going to say right now, to Leaf fans, be ready. Because I get the feeling let's say Marner ends up going to Tampa. Marner goes to Florida. He's probably going to sign for less money. My guess is that if Mitch Marner gets traded and signs an extension, his salary cap will be around it, probably about $9 million, maybe $9.5. Or maybe it's 10. But I don't think Marner gets a big raise from another team that picks him up. It will be interesting to see where they go with this, but they have to change it. We are 8 years into this experiment. It does not work. This team has not had depth behind the core guys. So one thing I want to talk about too is everybody, talks about how terrible Marner, Matthews, these guys are awful. But if you're playing against the Leafs, all you have to do is shut down a few guys and you're good. If you're against Colorado, yeah, you can shut down McKinnon, but there's a lot of other guys that can hurt you. If you're against the Rangers, you shut down Panarin. Panarin was kind of shut down in the first round. The Rangers still swept Washington. This is the reality, is that for teams that win Stanley Cups, they don't have to get points from the main guy. Tampa Bay wins the Stanley Cup where Stamkos plays like a couple of shifts in one game. They still found a way to win a Stanley Cup. So for the Toronto Maple Leafs, paying guys is great. It's fine. It's nice that they're loyal to their players and they're willing to financially reward them. But it has cost them depth. It has cost them that depth that would otherwise get them over the hump. This is a team that needs depth desperately up front and on the blue line. They need somebody on the defense too who can be that Cale Makar, Quinn Hughes, Adam Fox. That level of defenseman the Leafs really haven't had. And I'm not saying that as an insult to Morgan Rielly. Morgan Rielly's a very good defenseman, but they haven't had that clutch go-to defenseman who is really a key guy that you could say, wow, he's fantastic. They haven't had that. And so that's problematic. So they've tried patching things together this year. They tried bringing in Bertuzzi and Domi for that grit, that sandpaper. They already had that. They've been doing that for years. For years, we've seen them bringing guys in. Oh, they're bringing in Reeves for toughness. Well, that's what Wayne Simmons was before that, too. Like, we've seen this storyline with Toronto, and every year we buy the same thing. Toronto goes out in the offseason. They pick some guys up, and we go, oh, they look like they're going to have depth, and they're going to have more sandpaper this year. Right, so you bring in Bertuzzi and Domi, and you lose Michael Bunting. So you're not gaining enough scoring depth, and this has been the problem for Toronto. They're going to have to move one of those core four and get a financial situation for their team that looks more like other teams that are still in the playoffs. It's not about lowballing players either. It's about trying to put together a roster that's going to work. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you've not done so already. Again, Toronto is always an interesting story. It is always a team that gives us a lot to discuss and not a lot of success in those discussions. I will agree with something that Steve Dangle said after the Game 7. The Leafs are a good team. You don't get to overtime against Boston. You don't get to a Game 7 against Boston if you're not a good team. They're not a great team. And that's the problem, is you're 8 years into the Matthews experiment, the Matthews era, they're still not a great team. It's not on Matthews, it's on management that hasn't surrounded Matthews with other really good to great players. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.